Huge thank you to everyone for joining us today. We're really excited to tell you about winning with data science and hoping that you'll walk away from today's conversation with actionable next steps that you can apply tomorrow, as soon as tomorrow. So let's get started. So, the context, as Richie was saying, companies are spending more and more on data analytics and AI, but it's not so easy as just throwing money at the problem. And a lot of companies struggle with gaining value from their data science investments. So the reasons for this fall into really two buckets. One is data related technical reasons, right? So this involves, lack of data, lack of appropriate data infrastructure. Maybe you don't have skilled personnel, people with the requisite experience. Um, but what we want to focus on today is the non-technical reasons for why data science efforts fail, right? These are the business related reasons. It could be lack of executive buy-in, project management. And most of all, what we want to talk about today is effective collaboration with technical teams. In my experience and Howard's experience, we've seen firsthand how the collaboration with our business partners can literally make or break the success of a data science project. And so that's where we're going to focus on today, talking about how to become an effective collaborator. That is really the solution that we're pitching and what our book is all about, empowering business leaders to become better data science customers. So what is a customer? Another word for this, you might have heard stakeholder, collaborator, domain expert. These are all saying the same thing. It's the people who work with the data science teams, not the people who are doing the analyses themselves, but the people who are guiding the projects, scoping the projects. These are the people who play such a critical role in the success or failure of data science initiatives. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So what does a good customer look like? Good customers do three things. They ask the right questions, they challenge assumptions, and they speak the language, right? So we're going to go through a toy example here regarding contracting, right? So imagine you're getting some work done on your house and you engage a contractor. How should you approach that interaction, right? If you're a good customer, one, you're going to ask the right questions, right? What are we optimizing for in this remodel? Are we optimizing for open space or are we optimizing for storage, right? Really important question that shapes all future directions of work. Challenging assumptions, right? Why do we even need a countertop here? What if we just rip it out completely, right? So what are the assumptions inherent in the project scoping or in the plan that can be readdressed? And then third, you need to speak the language, right? You need to be able to communicate using some amount of technical vocabulary. Here, that means backsplash, refacing, island, granite quartz. These are the terms that allow the contractor and the customer to communicate effectively and use precise language and share a common understanding. What does this look like in a data science context? So being a good data science customer, so asking the right questions in data science world, what are the success metrics for this project? What are the outcomes we're measuring? How do we define those outcomes? Challenging assumptions. Are we assuming our data is high quality? Have we done thorough validation? If not, why haven't we, right? How are we thinking about missing data? Are you assuming that missing data should just be excluded? Right? These are examples of assumptions that should be challenged. And then finally, speaking the language. If you're a business person, if you're a non-technical person who can use and understands words like feature selection, cross-validation, discrimination, accuracy, inclusion criteria, it is going to elevate the quality of the dialogue that you have with your data science teams. You won't be talking past each other. You'll be talking with each other, and you'll be able to reach a common understanding. So this slide, these questions are tangible next steps that you can take into your next meeting, your next conversation with a data science team, right? If you get nothing else from this talk, right, just take this first question. What are the success metrics for this project and how are we defining them? Just try asking that question in the next meeting you have with the data team, right? Challenge an assumption. Ask a question like, how do we deal with missing data? Have we done thorough data validation, right? This is the most basic but most high yield piece of the puzzle that any non-technical data science customer can do that will elevate the quality of the project. So in summary, we need more good customers, right? I would even go as far as to say we don't need more data scientists. We need more effective data science customers who can work with them and leverage the power of the data science teams, right? So um, if you're a business leader, I would say don't study advanced statistics. Don't try to become a data scientist, right? Don't learn to code. You don't need to learn how to use GitHub. You don't need to learn how to deploy cloud-based solutions. But what you do need to learn is the 80/20 of data science concepts, right? That's the 20% of data science concepts that show up 80% in 80% of the use cases, the most high yield content. You need to learn how to effectively leverage your domain expertise, right? Data scientists, believe it or not, uh, bringing in a data scientist is not going to save the day, right? They need to work with domain experts. And so, for the domain experts out there, learning how to effectively leverage that expertise and bring it in to these technical conversations is extremely important. And then the last piece, recognize that you can make or break the success of data science projects. Without an effective data science customer, projects can be doomed to failure. I have been a part of many projects myself that didn't have an effective data science customer. And as a result, we wasted valuable time, effort, and resources. And I'm going to take you through a case study of that kind of project right now. So here we're going to talk about a real world example that I myself worked on where um, the goal was to build a churn prediction model, right? So the problem we were trying to solve is that clients were churning too fast from the platform. And so we spoke with some business teams and they said, in conversation with them, we decided, hey, if we had a model that could predict when people were going to churn, that would be, a great asset, and we could use that to save people from churning. The issue was the business partner that we partnered with, they were not as effective of a data science customer as they could have been. And as a result, uh, they didn't realize that although churn was the important business problem, there was no team that was ready to take on the model, right? If you build a model, the work doesn't end there, right? You need someone to actually use the model. And so it turned out that the business was not ready to implement the model and use the outputs of the model to inform business actions. For example, reaching out to clients, etc. And so as a result, we spent all this time, we built this great model. The performance was even quite good, but the model never ended up getting used by anyone. It just sat there because the business teams were not, the operational teams were not ready to deploy and implement the model. So what could have this looked like if we had a stronger data science customer, right? Well, first of all, that customer would not only have said, hey, the critical business problem here is churn, but when the data team proposed, hey, why don't we build a model? A good customer could have said, that's a good idea, but I'm concerned that without anyone on the business side to take on the task of using the model outputs and acting on them, I'm not sure that the model is going to be very useful, right? So someone to who could understand that building a model is not the end all be all. You need to act on the model outputs, and someone who can kind of understand what the data team is proposing, right? A lot of people hear data teams talk about, oh, we're going to build a model, we're going to deploy a model, we're going to use generative AI. They think, oh, these technical solutions are going to save the day. But actually, the work goes far beyond simply building a model, right? Um, so this is a one real world example that I worked on, and luckily in my case, a few months later, the teams did end up we got to a point where they were ready to take on the model, and so our work didn't go to waste. But there are too many examples out there of of data science projects that, like this one, go down the wrong path because of insufficient guidance from the data science customers. So I'm going to hand it off to my colleague Howard, uh, who's going to take you through the details even more about how to be a good data science customer and what are the questions you can ask. So off to you, Howard.
Thank you very much, Akshay, and fantastic introduction. One thing I want to pause to reflect on is we wrote the book focusing on business people being good data science customers. But a lot of the feedback we're receiving is that the book and the content is very useful for data scientists to understand how their customers are thinking. So it really ends up with both the data scientist and the customer bridging the communication. Now, with that said, When we talk about being a good data science customer, critical questions are important. It's one of the three areas that Akshay flagged earlier. And those questions can be in many different areas, whether it's project management, data products, what exactly are you looking to produce, the data storage questions, data exploration, which we encourage, data sources, where you're getting your information from, and understanding the limitations and values of that. Data modeling, which I think many of us really are passionate about and enjoy, um, and assessing those models, the assumptions in them, what is it used for, tools and resources. Why did you use that particular approach? Why that program versus another program? And lastly, ethics. And we can't leave behind ethics. We're understanding more and more of how important it is to begin a project with a perspective on ethics instead of later looking at it and asking it as a checklist. So we'll get into some of the details of this in the next slide as we go systematically through it. When we talk about the data science project, there are critical questions you can ask throughout the different stages. For example, at the data collection stage, you may be wondering specifically about data sources. What are the strengths? What are the weaknesses? What are the update frequencies with a particular data source? These are questions that you should ask because if you have a project that needs data updated on a daily basis, but that source is only updated monthly, it may be a problem. Or maybe you have a data resolution need that is very precise, yet this is at a much higher level. Maybe it's at the state level or national level. That's a problem. Again, you don't always have to get into the details, but as Akshay indicated, it's very helpful to know a little bit of the language. So it's reasonable to ask questions like, how is the data being stored? Is it going to be in a cloud server or do you have a different solution? If so, why? And I find it's really powerful for customers to ask the data science team why questions because that opens up the conversation on what were the choices they made, what were the motivations. Of course, as a data scientist, that means that there's some barrier on you. You need to be prepared to answer those questions. As you see in the project, it moves from step to step all the way to the modeling itself. And as I said, that's the part that so many people focus on, but these earlier parts are important as well. Let's go to the next slide, please. A very important question for the customer is to understand what exactly do they need? There are different levels of data products. Raw data, just gathering data together, is very useful as a data product if you happen to have a team of data scientists already staffed, ready to clean the data themselves, build those models, and they can handle all those other challenges. But if you don't have that staff and those tools and those capabilities on hand, then you probably are looking for a higher level data product. Maybe you're looking for a product that produces data reports and analyses that you can use as part of your decision making. Or maybe you want something at the top level, that automated decision making. And what do I mean by that? Those are the recommender systems you see, let's say on Netflix, for example. Or maybe this is some other chatbot that is answering it without a human involved in the process itself. Again, as the customer, you're the one who should have a vision on what product is appropriate. Of course, as the data scientist, you should understand the advantages and disadvantages of each product so to guide that conversation. Next slide, please. In terms of predictive models, there's a whole set of different questions you can ask. I focus on predictive models because honestly, that's where a lot of my career is built, and I love it. When we talk about predictive models, we can ask about the population itself. Who is going to be modeled? Who is not included? The outcome variable. What exactly are we trying to predict? Is our definition correct? Get the definition wrong, you may be producing a useless model. The features. I spent a lot of time working with customers on the conversation about features. What things should be considered in a model? What things should not? Why? Because for me, the feature selection is a great opportunity to improve previous models, to be creative, to go beyond what's already sitting there. Training, of course, is a detailed process and it's a very technical process, but the customer can ask some questions about what your approach. Did you use cross-validation? What was the performance? What was the performance on the test set? And that leads into model performance itself. And of course, they care about the performance in the real world. That's a real question. We'll continue, please. In terms of model performance, thank you so much. We have a whole series of questions that the customer could ask. Now, again, if you're the data scientist, my advice is ask yourself, are you prepared to answer the question on what performance metric did you use? Did you use MAPE? Did you look at a measure using median, for example? Do you have a binary outcome? Do you have a continuous outcome? What exactly did you do to control for overfitting? I mentioned cross-validation, but did you have other measures you used? What was the performance on the different evaluation metrics? And of course, how did you explore the generalizability? People want to know that when they put the model in the real world, not only does it do well, but maybe they have other ways to apply it, other populations, other areas for it to be used. Next slide, please. I mentioned ethics is often an area that comes to consideration later in the process, but it shouldn't. It helps to think about it right at the very beginning. In our book, we talk a lot about the importance of ethics and the different components of it, as well as the codes of ethics. But from the point of view of the customer, they should probably challenge the data science team on, have they considered how this could be used in a malicious way? What are the unintended consequences? Too often in the past, we haven't thought about that, and that's created problems. This question of consent comes up all the time. Doing a project right now where the client wanted to build a certain model, but the first question I asked was, do you have consent from the people who provided this data? Are you legally and ethically allowed to do it? And that caused them to pause a little bit. It really was an interesting moment for them as they realized, wait a second, they can't move forward with that model. Have you looked into the model bias? There's a number of ways to look into model bias. We talk a little bit about it in the book, but it's important to do this. Legal restrictions come in, as well as privacy. Are there components of the data that should not be used in the model or should not appear somewhere in the public domain? Do you have risks of someone de-identified because of the information you provide? All critical considerations in ethics. Next slide, please. Oh, this is great. You heard about one of Akshay's case studies, and the fun part of our collaborations, we have very similar but also different backgrounds. So I'm going to talk about an example where I was working with a private equity owned company. They had over 1 million members of a loyalty program. Loyalty programs could be an app, could be a card, but it's basically a way that companies try to get people to continue to go and buy things at their stores. Now, in this particular case, they had this incredible pile of data, but hadn't done anything with it. And what I mean they hadn't done anything with it was they were providing the same offers to 1 million people. They didn't customize their offers. They weren't even tracking the utilization. So they didn't look to see which of their customers was using their offers. No segmentation, no measures of profitability. Which are their most profitable loyalty customers or not? So we sat down with the customers and we started with the business leads, talking about what were the challenges they were having in really doing analysis. And it was a very interesting conversation because they started out not knowing what questions they should be asking. So that opened up a dialogue on what have we seen loyalty databases being used for in the past by other companies. We then did a blue sky session. The data science people were there, of course, but we had people from marketing and finance and digital and IT, and it was all around the data. Where could we get data from? Inside the shop and outside? What were important features, things that we should pay attention to? And what could the database be used for if they built it? A database that was comprehensive. And then we talked about success. And this is a great point that Akshay made earlier. If you talk about success, then you know where you're aiming. If you don't have that conversation, you don't know where you're going. For them, they wanted to be able to make targeted offers. Don't offer 1 million people the same thing. They wanted to get their customers more engaged. They wanted, of course, make money. It is a business. But they also wanted to understand who are their profitable customers. What we ended up doing, and this is on the results side, is building a very substantial database. It allowed them to do targeted marketing. They had an explosion in terms of their sales growth, and they were able to reactivate, to re-energize more than 50,000 accounts that simply had stopped responding because they were providing offers that simply were irrelevant to them. On the team end, they then took this clustering analysis and the internal team took it even further, which was great. And then the marketing teams have begun creating their own analytics processes to, again, increase revenue and reduce expenses. So success all around. Why don't we go to the next slide, please? One of the key things that we think about is the idea that an educated consumer is the best data science customer. Again, communicating needs. Take some time to understand really why are you doing this work? What does your business need? Ask good questions, challenge assumptions, and learn the language. That means a customer doesn't have to be a subject matter expert, but they should use some of the language. By the way, the data scientist also needs to ask good questions, challenge assumptions, and probably needs to learn some of that business language as well. I think we've got one last slide. Thank you. And Richie, back to you.
All right, sorry, I thought you were going to talk through the last slide. That was great. Yeah, lots of really informative stuff there. So we've got plenty of time for questions. So for everyone in the audience, if you've got questions for Howard or questions for Akshay, then please do let us know in the chat. In the meantime, I've got a few questions for you. So just to begin with, you talked a lot about asking good questions. And so there's a bit of an art to this. And I'm wondering, so it seems like meetings are the most obvious place to do that. Do you have any tips for how to structure meetings in order to make sure that people get the opportunity to ask good questions?
I'd say let's start with that director of data science at Cerebral, Akshay, if you don't mind, and then I'll jump in.
Sure. So this is a great question. So the important part of any meeting, and this is kind of what we lay out in the book. So for folks who haven't heard, we actually wrote the book as more of a story, and it follows two fictional characters and lays out their conversations, their interactions with data teams as they're trying to solve business problems. And the reason we did this is to show what does a good dialogue look like between a business team and a data team? What does an effective communication dynamic look like? And what you really want to happen is not have one-way communication, right? So an ineffective meeting structure would be data team comes in, they prepare a 50 slide deck, and they're going through the whole thing. And at the very end, they say, okay, any questions? And then you hear crickets. So that's an ineffective way to run a meeting. An effective way to run a meeting is you have the data team come in, they present their proposed approach, maybe, and at each point along the way, they pause, right? And that pause allows the business people, the domain experts, the customers to jump in. And this is where they introduce their domain expertise. This is where they ask those questions. This is where they challenge those assumptions. So, data team comes in, they said, hey, we defined our outcome variable as blank, right? Then the business person jumps in and says, so I'm curious, how come you chose to define it that way and not this way instead? Or what is the underlying data source that you're using to pull this data, right? And so at each step along the way, because all the data folks on this call know, in any data science analysis, there are dozens and dozens of assumptions that are baked in. And so you want to give the business people and the customers the time and the space to question and dig into each of those, because that's how you get closer to a more refined and more effective approach.
So a couple of other thoughts I just want to add to that, and I think Akshay made some fantastic points. So absolutely, we didn't talk about it yet, but in the book is actually told in narrative form. So there's fictitious characters. The dialogue, I think, is interesting. What I like to do is also, I'm a big fan of sending out an agenda in advance. And if there's materials I plan to discuss, I send them in advance. Gives people maybe the chance to look at it. Honestly, most people don't, but at least they had the chance. But then one thing that I'm very conscious about is trying to avoid the situation where the most senior person in the room is the only person who gets to speak. And so often I'm coming in as a senior consultant. Sometimes I'm being brought in by the board or the CEO, so it changes the atmosphere a little bit. But when that happens, I get to kind of go around the room a little bit and ask each person if they want, would you like to come in or not? No pressure. And again, this is something that I'll do more in an in-person meeting. Online, that's the beauty of being able to send private messages. So I'll send private messages to people saying, please let me know if you have a question you'd like me to respond to. Even if you don't want to come onto the camera and speak to it, type it here, and I'm happy to speak to it. So just giving people the opportunity to really express themselves and not be intimidated. I find sometimes business people get intimidated by data scientists. I find more junior people often get intimidated by senior people, and it's unfortunate because they're usually the incredible sources of creativity. So I want to hear those voices.
Absolutely, certainly. When you're just starting your career, you don't know all the things that are supposedly impossible. So you can come up with some better ideas, perhaps. All right. So you talked a lot about metrics. Are these things that need to be defined up front? Because sometimes you start a project and you're like, well, okay, that's obviously unrealistic, or you might have different stakeholders have different ideas of what you should be measuring. Can you just talk me through how you go about deciding on what a good metric is? And maybe if you've got some concrete examples of like sensible metrics for real projects, then let me know. I don't know who wants to go first.
Sure, yeah, I can start, Howard, and then I'll
Sure, no
pass it over.
problem.
Sure. So metrics are probably one of the most important pieces of a data science project. And what you see happen a lot of times is someone will propose a metric. And often the way this happens is you'll be having a conversation about the project. Someone throws out, hey, I think this is a reasonable metric. And then no one questions it. No one digs in any further. And that ends up being, inscribed in the stone tablet and doesn't get revisited until the end of the project. So there are a number of examples of poor metrics that have been selected, and the canonical example that many folks are familiar with is, say, standardized testing, right? So using standardized testing as a proxy for scholastic achievement, as a proxy for intelligence, right? And so much research out there has sort of debunked that now, and we know that standardized test scores are much more correlated with your zip code and your income than your intelligence or your work ethic. So that's an example of a flawed metric. And so the key question is, how can we avoid this pitfall of picking the wrong success metric? And one thing I use, I have actually created a template where it's a very simple table, and I'm happy to share this with the viewers as well after the call. It's a very simple table where each of the rows is a metric, a proposed metric, and then the columns are some very fundamental questions. For example, why are we measuring this? How is it meaningful? Is this actionable? How is this captured? Uh, what are the limitations to this metric? Is it a proxy? Is it actually what we're trying to measure, or is it a proxy for something that we don't actually have, right? Does this metric have the potential to be misinterpreted, right? If other people see, oh, look, they're tracking this metric, oh, that's kind of concerning. So these are a number of important questions for the team to discuss before defining a metric. And I guarantee you, if you go through this exercise, it's a simple exercise where you just fill in this, these columns. You'll discover that the metrics that were originally proposed are not always the best choice. And this is actually something that we go into in depth in the book, where Kamala, one of the characters, is trying to build a model to predict whether someone should get spine surgery or physical therapy for their back pain. And so Kamala, who's a clinician by training, has a really interesting conversation with her data team, where they're going back and forth and talking about, what do we decide as the outcome variable for this model, and what are the strengths and limitations of the different approaches. So that's my piece on picking metrics.
Excellent. Yeah, it just seems like it's incredibly important. Howard, did you have anything to add there?
So I think it's a phenomenal example. I was thinking about it in terms of some of the examples that have come up in my worlds recently. And one of them that just came up literally yesterday was a client is very interested in software for customer relationship management. Phone calls come in instead of having a live agent. Can they have an AI system set up which interprets the voice, provides a response, and then potentially redirects the customer? Something that is getting better and better over time. So back to something that I think was laid out early on is what is success? So I had asked the question to the customer, how do you define success? And then over to the software vendor. And they immediately said, well, the number of calls that we can respond to is much higher than if you have a live agent. And then I said, well, but let's be careful about your comparisons, because I'm not comparing you to a live agent. I'm comparing you to all the other software vendors who sell a very similar product. They paused. They weren't sure how to respond. And I said, do you have the balk rate? How often does someone just hang up the phone because they don't want to talk to you? And they said, no, we don't capture that. And I said, well, that's something that I think is probably one of many success metrics. Now, again, I was there on behalf of the client. I wasn't the one creating the software. But the fact that they weren't prepared for the comparisons was important. The fact that they hadn't thought about success metrics really was a challenge for them. So my client, who was interviewing other software vendors, said they're not confident with that vendor. They didn't look prepared.
That's very important, that like subtle differences in how you define, like you measure, like what you're comparing against is going to have pretty big implications for whether or not this or what the decisions are going to be based upon this. I'm also curious as to whether you need to have multiple metrics. Like, is it possible to have multiple metrics for success, or do you just want like one overall thing? So I guess, for example, like actually you talked about a customer churn example. So I guess you want the final metric to be what percentage of customers are churning, but you're going to have to measure a lot of other things before you get to that stage. Yeah, I don't know which one of you wants to talk about this. Like, how do you deal with having multiple metrics?
So perhaps I'll jump in this one first, Akshay, if it's okay. I find with most of my models, there is a primary metric. Let's say we're talking about predicting rental prices. Well, in that particular case, it's a measure of accuracy. And we can debate whether it's going to be the MAPE or it's going to be related to the median. We can debate that. But there's a primary measure. But there are other measures that are also important. They want to know about the substantial outliers. What are the percentage of the time that the model simply cannot provide a response? So I end up usually with a primary metric for most of my predictive models, but then I have secondary metrics that we review as well, because there's a range at which these models perform, in any given day. And so I don't look at a slight difference in the primary metric. I'm looking at a suite of metrics where one is a major decision maker and others are relevant to performance as well. Again, this is all about model performance, but when we talk about the customer defining success, that includes not just the model performance, but also measures such as the time it takes to produce the model, the cost and effort to maintain the model, overall profitability. There's a lot of other factors that play in.
Okay, yeah. So it just seems like you're gonna have to think quite carefully about like all the different things all the ways you want to measure success, and this is probably gonna happen like right at the start before you start like actually going and writing some code and building your model. Okay, so we got a load of questions from the audience. I'm going to switch to those now. So first question is from Lucian saying, what would you recommend to enhance the assertive communication between business and data folks? So do you want to tell me what you think assertive communication is, and then you can answer how do you make it better? Akshay, you look like you want to talk.
Sure. So I would maybe question the premise a little bit and say I'm not sure that communication needs to be more assertive. I actually think communication needs to be a little bit more humble and a little bit more inclusive. I think there's a lot of I think assertiveness can lead to defensiveness. Assertiveness can lead to people talking past each other. I think what we need to do is lift each other up, right? So the data teams need to take the time to educate and explain concepts to their non-technical colleagues. not using jargon that they don't understand, not speaking 100 miles a minute. And similarly, the business folks need to take the time to educate the data folks on the business needs, right? Otherwise, if you have the data team being assertive, being like, oh, we need to take this analytical approach, and then the business people are saying, hey, but this isn't the business problem, like no one's going to blah blah blah. It's not effective. And if you see the conversations that we lay out in the book, I actually wouldn't say the word assertive comes up. It's very much a inclusive and back and forth, give and take type of dialogue where Kamala says one thing, and then the data people say, oh, that's really insightful. I actually hadn't considered that. Or maybe Kamala says something, and then the data team says, that's a good point, but you have to consider this limitation. So I think that shape of communication is much more effective.
I want to second that, but also as you were speaking, Akshay, I was having flashbacks to my first job where I showed up all ready to take data, analyze data, build models. And I'm going to be honest, I was not a good listener. And as a result, I really wasn't producing much. I was producing things on my desktop, but nothing that ever came out in the real world. And I needed to learn not only how to listen, but how to partner well. In my case, I developed a partnership with some world-class project managers, and that took my desktop exercises to something that really was helping people. But that was an education. And I think really, to your point, building that collaborative approach is going to get far, far more results than someone simply just saying, well, I know I have the answer and let me prove to you why.
Okay, we're back to making sure that you're communicating well with other people again. So this seems very useful throughout. Listen to people as well as just yabbering away. Excellent. Okay, so next question comes from Victor. Victor says, how do you convince data science customers of the value of your product if you're constantly also having to educate them, considering they have no knowledge whatsoever? Okay, yeah. It sounds like similar things.
It's a great question. Why don't I take that one first? So these can happen in parallel, but they're also conversations at a different level. The education of a data science customer is often around why certain decisions or options can be made in terms of the definitions, let's say, of an outcome variable or the features or the transformations. That's an education process. But defining success is often very driven by the customer. That can still be a dialogue, but they're the ones who often walk in with an expectation of, here's what I'd like to achieve. It's helpful to ground that expectation. For example, someone says, I want to have a model that's going to predict the performance of this drug in terms of the impact on mortality at a patient level, and it's going to be accurate within this range. And you say, okay, I understand the goal of the model. I understand what you're trying to produce. In the public domain, this is the best model. So you want to have a model that's 4 times more accurate than anything's ever been done before. And that grounds it for them. So a lot of it is really about defining success, hopefully with the client. And usually I find if you have the conversations in a measured way, you can work with them on what are achievable measures of success. And then honestly, then someone has to deliver, right? Someone has to do their best job and recognize how they're improving, getting closer to success, and perhaps they achieve it on the first time. Maybe it takes the 5th or 6th iteration of the model to achieve that success.
Yeah, certainly if someone's asking for like 4 times better performance of a model than anything that's ever been done before, it might not happen on the first attempt.
But that's the key education, right? Isn't that, Richie? So they may not know what is the standard. So for example, I was seeing this with a recent model we were trying to build, and it was a price estimation model. The client said, listen, you're sitting here, you're at a 10% MAPE. I can't use 10%. Fair point. I said, okay, well, let's do a little research. Let's understand what actually exists in the industry. And it turned out that was pretty much the best that exists in the industry. So we came back to them and said, we can continue to do more exploration, but we may be near what is the minimum value we're being able to get. So it's going to be your decision, can you use it or not? And that was helpful.
Absolutely. Yeah, just having that background context on like what exists already just seemed incredibly important. Okay, we've got a very big question next. Kevin asks, how is the data science being discussed related to AI, if at all?
Sure, yeah, I can start with this one. A lot of the concepts that we're talking about have direct relevance to AI, right? We're talking about asking good questions, questioning assumptions, speaking the language. All of these still apply in the world of AI, even generative AI, especially things around success metrics. So I'll give you one piece here that's extremely relevant now. We have a ton of organizations that are using generative AI to improve their operational efficiency. Are they measuring the right outcomes, right? And Howard was getting to this with his voice assistant example, where the company was tracking uh, the number of calls where customers actually talked to them, but they weren't tracking how many times the people just hung up on the voice agent, right? So similarly, there's a challenge with tracking success metrics for generative AI, because generative AI can do tasks that that previous systems have not been able to do. And coming from the healthcare world, these are things like writing clinicians notes, right? These are things like responding to patient chat messages. And so if you are thinking about deploying a generative AI system within your organization, uh, you need to not only be thinking about model performance, but also, is this actually having the impact on, say, efficiency that I intended? Because, for example, what we're seeing from a lot of places that have piloted this technology is that, let's say you have an AI system that can respond to customer messages or client messages. The goal is to either to be able to respond to more patient messages, right? So you can get more done in less time, or you might want to decrease burnout on the human side, right? Um, or you might want to free up time for humans to do other things, right? So those are your three desired outcomes. You need to measure every single one of those. And turns out that a lot of places that have piloted this technology have found they're actually not moving the needle on these things, right? Employing these AIs to respond to patient messages, it's actually not reducing human burnout to the extent that we expected. It's actually not freeing up time so that humans can go do more productive activities. So I would say, don't take it for granted that when you bring in AI, it's going to save the day and solve all your problems. You need to measure it. And if you don't, you could end up, wasting resources and effort, just as you would for traditional data science projects.
I just want to jump on that. Actually, you make a fantastic point, and it reminded me a little bit of how there's a stretch where just every company felt like they needed to go to the cloud. It was a mandatory. And then it has been very beneficial for some companies, but some companies, after doing the analysis, realized that they gained nothing. They were spending more, not less, on cloud computing than if they had just stayed with their own proprietary data storage. And it's not to say that that's not a good solution, but it's a good solution in some circumstances. So I really love your point there. And it also plays into this idea of thinking through what are the potential unintended consequences of technology, which is something that was fleshed out a little bit in our ethics chapter. But just because you feel like you're optimizing in one area, that doesn't mean you're gaining throughout. And you may not be having a net positive for your organization or for your customers. And ultimately, all of us, when we use the word customer, we might be sliding back and forth between the idea of the person who's hiring our team, or if you have, let's say you're a retail business or you're for healthcare with patients, that person is also your customer, and they're probably the most important customer. They need to see the benefit.
That is very interesting, the idea of like optimizing or at least monitoring multiple metrics at once. I suppose I was thinking like maybe 10 years ago, there was this sort of rash of startups where they were just optimizing for how quickly can we grow. And then turned out they were growing incredibly unprofitably. So they were hitting their metrics for growth, but yeah, not making any money whatsoever. So I can certainly see how you probably want to measure multiple things just to check you're doing the right thing. Okay, next question comes from Adam. So Adam asks, because we were talking a lot about asking the right questions. So what are the right questions that can come up for business to business stuff for supporting a client's overall digital transformation and digital data management? So, okay, so you're running some kind of digital transformation program or data transformation program, are there any important questions that come up in that area?
So I can go first if you'd like.
Sure.
So I would first kind of step back and say B2B or B2C isn't really necessarily the critical question. The critical one is back to defining success. What are they looking to achieve? So in our book, we do actually pinpoint specific questions that can be asked, whether it's around data storage, whether it's around response time. And those are all contained in the book. But I think the key thing is to remove yourself from thinking that B2B is truly different from B2C. Fundamentally, they're businesses, they have customers, their customers happen to be other businesses, and they have expectations in terms of performance and value add. So I would start with that framework. And then from the particular questions point of view, it really comes back to defining the success with respect to the cost that they're spending, the time for construction, the stability over time, and those types of responsiveness elements. But that's my overall framework for it. Again, we go into a lot of details in the book, going piece by piece through specific questions for each particular item. In fact, the way the book is structured, you have dialogues throughout the chapters, but every chapter ends with a set of relevant questions, and the relevant questions are often organized by categories, such as the way you framed in your question. Thank you.
All right,
Yeah,
so really, go back to your business goals and make sure that there is actually a problem you're solving there. Okay, Akshay, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, a useful framework that I use to think about this question is, what level are you at in the digital transformation, right? Are you a level one where maybe you have data but you're not sure what to do with it? Maybe your data is living in random spreadsheets, not really stored in one central place. So for those folks, how do you get to level two? Well, there it becomes about adopting some sort of data storage solution or data tracking solution. So maybe if you're living in spreadsheet world, you want to move to an Airtable type solution, which is a lightweight database of some sorts. Level two, this gets to the point, if you're a level two company in terms of data infrastructure, maybe you have a central database, maybe you're collecting a lot of data from your users, but none of that data is usable. It's just sitting in raw format in some data lake. And so here it's the main objective is to get that data into a usable format through transformation pipelines, data cleaning pipelines, and then surfacing that data to your business via some sort of business intelligence tool. So that's kind of level two. And then level three, you have companies in level three that are leveraging their data to build data products, right? They're building reports, they're building automated decision-making systems, building models, and then deploying those models. So at level three, it becomes about, do you have the infrastructure to deploy and release data products in production? So thinking about, where does my company fall in those three levels, and how can I level up if I need to?
I like that. So you really got to understand the state of your own business before you decide where you're going with it. And if everything's a horrible mess, you're probably not going to want to put out some kind of sophisticated machine learning product just yet. Go step by step. All right. Next question is from Melissa. Melissa asks, for data scientists, do you have advice on handling situations you realize you aren't prepared to immediately answer a question posed to you by a customer? Yes, what happens if you get asked a question and you have no idea what the answer is?
So I saw this question and I loved it. I specifically asked them to put this on the screen. That's a brilliant question. The first thing I would say is, do not bluff. You will help nobody by simply pretending you know the answer. And you may permanently lose credibility. I am very comfortable saying, that's a great question. I really appreciate you asking it. I'm happy to take it offline and I'll come back to you very shortly with an answer. And they say, well, what is very shortly? And I can say, I'm going to give you an answer within the next 2 business days or something like that. It happens. That means that customer is really thinking more deeply than perhaps you had anticipated. Of course, I like to plan in advance. I like to anticipate what questions I might get and then have those answers prepped. but I don't always anticipate right, and people surprise me. That's the great thing about diverse groups in the room. So again, if I don't know the answer, of course, I usually am not showing up as a one-person team. In this case, we've got I got a brilliant colleague, Akshay, who'll know the answers almost every time, so it's great. But if the rest of the team doesn't know it, I think it's really about being transparent and saying that you'll come back to them with an answer, but also giving them a commit to commit. I commit to giving you an answer by a certain time. I think that's important. It builds trust. By the way, you can't use that too many times in a meeting, or else you'll find that even though you're being honest with them, at some point, they just lose confidence in you. As a lecturer, when I'm teaching, the rule of thumb I have is I get that once per class. I get to say, great question. I absolutely don't know, but I'm going to research it and I will get back to you by this date. So hopefully you don't get too many in the same meeting, but you get to say it certainly at least once. What are your thoughts, Akshay?
Actually, before we get to that, challenge for the audience then. You got 7 minutes to think of a question that neither of them can answer. All right. Actually, go on.
No, I totally agree. I don't have too much to add. I totally agree that it's better to acknowledge when you don't know something. Worst thing is to ramble on and pretend you know something. So totally agree with what Howard said.
It's a shame. That's my standard approach in my webinars. I'll just ramble on for a bit. Okay. Next question comes from CFAT. CFAT asks, how important is data literacy and AI literacy, I guess? Data and AI training for the business world. So for all your colleagues who don't have data in their job title or AI in their job title, what do they need to know and why is it important?
Yeah, I can start with this one. So in the book, we talk about a number of biases, selection bias, information bias, etc. One of the biases we don't cover in the book is AI is my savior bias, which is the bias where people think that AI is going to come and solve all your problems. This is why, related to what I was saying before, we need business people who are experts at asking questions, challenging assumptions, knowing what to measure, right? We talked a lot about measurement so far. And so these are the people. Leave the AI saviorism to the data people, right? Leave that to the vendors. The vendors are going to come and they're going to sing the praises of their AI solutions. It's your job to say, great, I believe you have a great product, but I'm not going to put my money on the table until we measure it, or I'm not going to sign the full contract until we measure it, right? So as business people, it's very, very important for you all to, and this is where leveraging your own expertise, your business knowledge, is more important than trying to become an expert in AI. We don't need the business people to become AI experts. We need them to stand strong and be able to voice what is important to the business, right? What are the metrics that really matter? So that no matter what, shiny object the vendors show you, no matter what technical jargon the vendors throw at you, you can stand your ground confidently and say, hey, if this doesn't improve my team's efficiency as measured by XYZ by 10%, it doesn't matter, right? So that's what an effective data science customer needs to be able to say, and that's why some base amount of data literacy, AI literacy, like we said, speak the language, right, is necessary. But ultimately, it comes down to asking the right questions and effectively leveraging your domain expertise.
I also like the point you made in the presentation that you need to understand all that technical jargon just in order to be able to have a good conversation. So that seems like a very important sort of broad literacy skill. You need to be able to know the words or know what your colleagues are talking about when they use technical terms.
Yeah, again, you don't need to know all the words, right? You can't be expected to be an expert, but you should know some of the words. Again, the 20% of words that show up 80% of the time. But you also need to not be afraid to say, what does this mean, right? You should not be afraid to ask seemingly basic questions like that. And first of all, I should say the data people should not be using terms that require you to even ask that question, right? They should be using understandable knowledge. And if they're not, it's actually kind of a red flag that they might be trying to overly complicate things, right? So it's very important for the business people to say, hey, can you define this term so that we're all on the same page?
It's a great point, and I think it was Einstein who said that if you can't explain something in simple language, then you don't understand it. I use that as a metric, by the way, when I'm working with vendors. Often they're trying to sell software. It's exactly what Akshay said, and some of the software is great, but I love really just asking them, what is different about your software than all the other vendors who sell this product? And ask them to explain it, but explain it in a language that does not require any technical knowledge. And I would say, assume I know nothing about data or data science. Tell me what makes yours different. And if they can do that, I'm appreciating, I'm listening more. If they can't break it down into simple language, or they simply can't come up with a compelling reason, well, they lose a lot of credibility right there.
Absolutely. And any salesperson ought to be able to explain their product in simple, non-technical language, you would hope. So the vendors ought to have that covered. If they're not, they're doing a bad job. All right. We've maybe got time for one more question. Before we go to that, I just want to say we've got some upcoming webinars for you. So next week, you got a choice of pair programming with GitHub Copilot on Tuesday. So if you're interested in learning how to use generative AI in order to help you write code faster, or perhaps if you're managing a team that is writing code, then that's certainly a session you're going to want to attend. And then on Wednesday, we've got a session on the Data Camp roadmap. So that'll be myself and Adele explaining what's going on or what's coming soon with Data Camp. All right. So let's go to the final question then. So this comes from Samer saying, is it better that data scientists should have a role in early life of business or startups in order to build a data science oriented business? So yeah, do data scientists need some career business experience?
Go ahead, Howard.
Well, I'll go with mine. I think there's different paths, honestly. And some people work and learn better in a large corporate environment with a lot of structure. And the position you fill is fairly well defined. You'll learn business needs. And other people prefer the more flexible space that is available to you in a startup where you have to do many goals. So I really think it comes down to individual, and people learn and grow better in different environments. That's my approach. And I would have to say, I started in a large environment. My first major job outside of graduate school was at Capital One. It was amazing place to work, and they had great training. I had some world-class managers. Maybe it's not the best environment for me.
Yeah, I'll just add on to that a little bit. I interpreted the question as, is it important to bring in a data scientist early at the early stage of a company so that the company can scale and become a data science oriented business? This is what we did at Cerebral, where when the company was still very early, we brought in data people. I was one of the first data science hires, and we built out this team so that from a very early stage, we set up a data lake. We set up ETL pipelines. We set up a business intelligence tool, and that allowed once the business started collecting data, it allowed the non-technical folks to access that data through our business intelligence tool. We use Looker from a very early stage. So I think if you have someone with that background early on, they can help set up this infrastructure that allows you to extract value from your data from as early as possible.
I love that the question can be interpreted in two completely different ways, and that's two great answers. So yeah, from the career side, yeah, there's more than one way to do a career. Sometimes you might want to do some data science early and business later. That's kind of the way I've done things. You might do business first, then data science, and then from the actually to your point, yeah, it's often very helpful to have someone who knows about data very early in the life cycle of a business, because you want data culture to be embedded right from the start. Okay, we're at time now, so I think we're going to have to call it a day. Thank you once again, Akshay and Howard. That was brilliant. That was so informative. Lots of great questions. So thank you to Reese for moderating. Thank you to everyone in the audience who asked a question. Thank you to everyone who showed up today. I love the engagement and the enthusiasm. I hope to see you all again in future webinars. So yeah, see you next week, hopefully.